Good morning, everyone. My name is Dana Trimboli, and I am the Chief of Staff to President Eanes and Interim Vice President for Institutional Advancement at York College. I want to thank you for joining this virtual event, which I trust will be beneficial to you. I will serve as this morning's moderator. And so the way the event will work today is that we will get some greetings by President Eanes. Then we will hear our keynote address by Sheena Wright. And then at the conclusion of that address, you will be able to put questions in the chat, and I will be sharing those questions with the group, and Ms. Wright will be able to respond to them. Thank you again for attending the York College Executive Leadership Breakfast. I look forward to your questions following the presentation. And now, greetings from our president, Dr. Berenecea Johnson-Eanes.
Good morning. Good to see all of you all. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining our virtual breakfast event. I'm Berenecea Johnson-Eanes. On behalf of the York College faculty, staff, and students, we welcome you. This breakfast is usually a wonderful gathering on our campus that they have been doing since 2015. So we wanted to be able to gather here together and honor that history, and also honor the fact that we are trying to go from COVID crisis to COVID maintenance. I want to highlight the fact that I'm grateful for this community, that you all signed up for this morning, and that you continue to Zoom and Zoom and Zoom in this very, very, very challenging time to try to figure out how to connect. So thank you for being a part of our community. I want to also thank Ms. Sheena Wright for agreeing to be our keynote speaker, and look forward to her message. Let me also thank our co-sponsor, the Queen's Daily Eagle, and its publisher, Michael Nussbaum, and the editor, David Brand, for graciously joining us in this effort. The Queen's Daily Eagle is a vibrant newspaper in our community, and we know that they represent us well. They are the top-notch publication covering government, legal system, education, and more. I also want to thank the students, faculty, and staff, board members, and our community friends, our local electeds, and everyone else that's joining us today, because we know without you, we would not be the One York that we are. The York College Executive Leadership Breakfast Series was founded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina to bring in thought leaders across the professional spectrum to share their thoughts and expertise with York and Queens community. Ironically, the series' first speaker was also from the United Way, when Congressman Gregory Meeks hosted Larry Mandel, who preceded Ms. Wright in that role, to discuss natural disasters and the potential of New York and how we would respond to those things. You may, and we will eventually experience many things in our lives. And we understand that the reality is that the one thing that is constant is change. We understand the rich history of Jamaica Queens and the York community and their dedication to all this work. We are living in unpredictable times, and we continue to be nimble and be focused on being community and being one York community, external and internal. So once again, I want to thank all of you all for joining us. And I want to also thank each of you who have been so congratulatory to me in my appointment as the permanent president here at York College. It is my deep, deep, deep esteem and honor to serve this college community. So without further ado, I want to thank you again, Ms. Sheena Wright. I want to thank all the organizers, Ms. Trimboli, Ms. Marcia, all of our team everywhere that has been doing all the great work that we're trying to do here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope you enjoy the breakfast.
Thank you so much, President Eanes. And let me add to the long list of congratulations. Certainly appreciate leadership in times such as these, right? I can't imagine what is on your plate and trying to manage this COVID, everything at this moment. So congratulations to you. And certainly you'll be in my prayers as well. So I appreciate that. And thank you to the York and Queens community for inviting me to share with you this morning. When I was approached, the topics for our suggestion were, we're in the midst of the census. Could you talk a little bit about that, as well as, you know, kind of reflecting back on that early days of this breakfast, thinking about we're coming on the anniversary of Hurricane Sandy. And that was actually when it made landfall on October 29th, was my first day on the job at United Way of New York City. And I thought about those two topics, the census, you know, Hurricane Sandy kind of anniversary, and certainly the natural disasters. And I thought about it, certainly talking about those things in the midst of COVID-19, in the midst of all of the calls for racial equity and social justice. And really kind of thought, you know, how do these things connect? And they certainly, in fact, do. And, you know, I'll kind of talk through a bit how I see that constellation of events and activities, and certainly invite a conversation and hope that we can have a dialogue about it. But my headline would be, for how these things connect, is that civic participation is essential and can change the trajectory of communities of color, low-income communities, and really ensure that we can meet the challenges that face us, that we know will face us tomorrow. And the census is something that we've been doing since the birth of our nation. When we, you know, formed these United States of America, states certainly had rights, and then we also gave rights to the federal government, as well as resources, and we apportioned power and money. And what we said is, federal government, when you collect money from citizens of these United States, we need you to reallocate those funds to those states by population, to ensure that the collective needs are met for the United States of America. And as you can imagine, it's something that happens every 10 years. It's in our US Constitution. It is critically important for the apportionment of resources. And it's something that, you know, we really don't think about because it happens every decade. It's not front and center on our minds, but it is absolutely critically important. We started at United Way of New York City getting very invested and involved in the 2020 census over a year ago. And this really was based on the fact that this very, you know, kind of innocuous, you know, civic duty that we have to do that helps us manage our nation, quite frankly, was weaponized, unfortunately, by the current federal administration. And because it distributes money and power, the census determines $1.5 trillion of federal resources. $1.5 trillion gets distributed across the states based on the census count. The census also distributes congressional seats. It will determine how many people can represent us in Congress, in the House of Representatives. So this is an extremely important initiative that happens every 10 years. And seizing on the opportunity to distribute money and power, unfortunately, the federal administration decided to, as I said, weaponize the census, and wanted to, quite frankly, ensure, and this is something that we hear a lot, unfortunately, in rhetoric, that the blue states had less money and less power. And one of the ways to do that was to require a citizenship question. The census has 10 simple questions. It just wants to know how many people live in your household, essentially to count the people. Are there, you know, under the age of 5, you know, basic questions about your household. It's never asked a question about citizenship, ever, in the history of this country, in the history of the census. And there was a concerted effort to add that question. The goal was to suppress the count in those blue states, quite frankly. The goal was to incite fear in the immigrant community so that they would not, in fact, fill out the census. That was the goal and that was the objective. So a lot of cities and states really were concerned about this turn of events and decided that we needed to invest in ensuring that we had a fair and accurate count, that we would have full kind of civic participation in this census because so much was at stake. Billions and billions of dollars were at stake that would go to New York City to fund our schools, to fund our infrastructure, our highways, our transit system, to fund programs for low-income families. These are critical resources that we need. So the city of New York and the state of New York actually started to think about how do we activate an investment to make sure that we can get out the count, that we can make sure that we're appropriately counted. And there were also advocacy organizations like the New York Immigration Coalition and others that sued the Trump administration saying that it was unconstitutional, it was inappropriate to add that citizenship question on the census. So we had been planning, we had been, kind of really working with the city and 160 community-based organizations around the city of New York and many, many more to figure out how do we spread the word? How do we let people know that this is our opportunity to get our fair share of resources? How do we communicate that is safe, that all of these things, and at the same time, this battle was happening legally. The Supreme Court declared the question unconstitutional. They looked at the evidence that showed that the reason that this question was being trying to be put on the census was because it was desired to suppress the count for political reasons. But that specter of fear kind of was certainly still there. So it had done quite some damage already and really discouraging people from filling out the census. But there was a counter campaign that was launched, certainly here in the city of New York and in the state, to make sure that we could have a fair and accurate count. The other thing to appreciate about the census, and certainly it's important for all of us, for immigrant communities, for communities of color. The first census that was done in this country counted Black people as 3/5 of a person. That 3/5 clause in the United States Constitution did not count us as full human beings in this country. And so when I think about the census and really being very fully civically engaged and represented and making sure that my voice is heard, I think about that legacy as well, and the legacy of systemic racism and the injustices that have been brought on Black people. So for me, it's also an act of asserting my identity as a Black person in America that is fully here, present, and engaged and empowered and demands to be counted. So it's a really important tool for us to also to be civically engaged. As we developed a plan to communicate the census, to activate through a network of community-based organizations, the way the census works is that you have an opportunity to self-respond. That self-response date started on March 13th, and then we know what happened, COVID hit. And it was a real challenge in terms of really activating and getting people out, but we were able to kind of be agile, move online, use social media, do a host of things. I want to share with you that as of today, the self-response rate in New York City is about 60%, which is not good. So that means that we put billions of dollars into the federal pot, and we're going to get back much less than what we put in. The last census, we contributed $22 billion more than we got back for our communities. So there's still a lot at stake. We have until the end of this month in order to complete the count. Unfortunately, because the Trump administration was not successful in putting the citizenship question, what they did do is underfund the federal Census Bureau, and they also reduced the time for the count. Originally, it was supposed to be the end of October, and just a few weeks ago, they cut the time down to the end of September. So this is an urgent time where over these next 13 days, we have to spread the word and get out the count and make sure that we are represented. Those resources, as I said, fund things that are critical to us. And as we are heading into hurricane season, and we're seeing what's happening in Florida, we're seeing the massive wildfires in California, and what is happening with regard to climate change and how it's impacting our communities, it underscores, and COVID-19, it underscores the need for a fair and accurate count so that we can get our resources, that we can have our representation. And we also use census data to plan as a city. How many hospitals do we need? How many beds do we need? It's based on census data. It's based on a population count. So ensuring that that happens over these next 13 days, if there's anything that this community can do, there certainly are a few things that are not as important as that, certainly over this next period of time. And when we think about the apportionment of resources to things like education, like infrastructure, and we see, and what COVID-19 has certainly revealed, is the profound disparities in access to opportunity, which is really about resources. The profound disparities in the underfunding of schools that predominantly have children of color in them. The profound disparities in infrastructure in communities that are predominantly people of color. Having our voices heard, not only in the census, but as we vote, not only for national offices, but for our local offices, we are going to have a massive shift in leadership in this city in 2021 and 2022. We've got 4 out of 5 borough presidents, over half of the city council, and the mayor's race. There's a lot going on, and we need to be engaged. Our voices need to be heard. We need to be counted. We need to really lean in, because the difference, what happens when we don't do that is we have the kinds of outcomes that we have. We have poor educational opportunities, poor infrastructure, poor healthcare systems, because we are not demanding that and really ensuring that the appropriate level of investment and resource goes to where it's needed most to produce the outcomes that we need to produce. The last thing I'll say about this is, I feel like this is a moment where it's almost overwhelming with the challenges that we face. With COVID-19, with, we feel like attacks from lots of different sides, with the real deep appreciation of the racial disparities and inequities and unequal access to opportunity. It really feels sometimes just, overwhelming, like a lot. But I do fundamentally believe that these issues and challenges and problems can be solved. We are a city, we are a country that has intellect, that has passion and commitment. When we think about our forefathers and our ancestors and our foremothers and what they had to persevere and go through to get us where we are, if we tap into that, we have what it takes. And if we think about not just the current challenges, but what happens when we do overcome them, what happens when we do solve those problems, If we close the opportunity gap and make sure that our young people are resourced and have the right education and other supports that they need, we will grow the GDP by $500 billion. If we close those opportunity gaps, those young people will find the answers to the challenges that we have created around climate change, around, that will help us not only manage through natural disasters, but solve those problems. And if we keep our eyes on that prize, make sure that we are really fighting to ensure that those investments are made, that they're equitably made, to solve the problems of tomorrow, we will get there. We will get there. We've got miles to go, but we will get there. And just a word about this kind of hurricane season that we're in. I mean, Sandy was the worst storm that we have seen in New York since the 1700s. And what we know for sure is that there will be more Sandys. COVID-19 is a superstorm in and of itself. And we know a lot of the lessons that we've learned is that we have to invest in our community. We have to make sure that community-based organizations that are on the front lines of any disaster have the resources and the strength and the stability to be of service. And we have to make sure that we're really connecting the dots between civic participation and investment in our communities so that we can ensure our future. So I would love to hear from this group on thoughts and ideas and suggestions and ways that we could move forward. But thank you for inviting me to share with you this morning.
Please be sure. Thank you so much, Sheena. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You can begin to type your questions in the chat and I will share them with Sheena.
Thank you, Sheena. We so appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
And we know that this is not, for any of us, our everyday way of engaging. I want to also make sure that I acknowledge all of our local electeds that are on the call. Assemblymember Alicia Heineman is on the call. Thank you for being here. Councilmember Adrian Adams, Danique Miller, and New York Senator Leroy Comrie. All of you all, thank you so much for your continued support of York College. I appreciate that. And I know that you all probably echo and feel very strongly about some of the things that Sheena mentioned, particularly around our census and around the strategy that we have to take in our community.
And I will say that Queens is at 60%. So there's work, there's ground to cover. And I know that all of those leaders that you just mentioned have been certainly leading the fight. The city council invested an unprecedented amount in the census, and we certainly partnered with them. But there's more work to do in these next few days. So we're very hopeful that people on this call will leave here with an assignment to ensure that their friends and colleagues and families are counted.
So Sheena, we have a few questions for you. Do you have suggestions about how higher education can collaborate with our government institutions and/or elected officials to help close the gap?
Absolutely. Certainly, I think there's several ways. Higher education certainly is a really wealth of research. There's a lot of the way that we really get to the solutions is we have to diagnose what the problems are, why they exist, what are the root causes, design solutions for them and deploy them. And often I think the way our government works, it's not always thinking kind of long-term in terms of the impact, and we invest a lot on immediate kind of needs and an election cycle. And universities are institutions that really could lend, students and faculty to really grapple in doing that diagnosis and design phase in partnership with government. So I think that certainly is one way. I think another way for universities to really partner with government, we have a real skills gap problem, quite frankly. United Way sits at the intersection of 100 corporate partners, 600 community-based organizations, and we're also the largest partner of some of the largest agencies in the city and the state, including the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And one of the things that we hear often from our corporate partners is that even now there are 200,000 jobs that need to be filled, but there's a skills gap. And so one of the things government really kind of manages a workforce development ecosystem, and higher education is preparing young people for the world of work and entrepreneurship, et cetera. There needs to be a tighter kind of connection and more work done between higher ed and government, so that higher ed is really informing and influencing government on what the needs are of their students as they're entering the workforce, and certainly in tight partnership with employers as well. So there's a huge role for higher ed to play in the pipeline of workforce development in partnership with government and the corporate sector. So those are two examples.
Thank you, Sheena. So I always like questions like this. As a leader, what keeps you awake at night?
I laugh because I woke up at like 3 o'clock this morning with things on my mind. This is, and that's how I said a prayer for President. This is really, I think, a very difficult time to be a leader of any organization, to be a leader of your family, to be in any kind of leadership role. And certainly what I worry about is that people have what they need to do their best work in an environment that is so volatile. There's so many unknowns, and resources are challenged. I know what is possible and what can be achieved, but ensuring that you have what you need in order to get the job done is a constant worry and challenge, and certainly in this environment. And I think about particularly in communities of color and organizations that serve communities of color are often underfunded and under-resourced, and are doing amazing work, and with the right resource, the appropriate resource, can have so much greater impact. So that's one of the things that worries me. How do we change that dynamic? How do we change those opportunities to really move the needle on some of the problems that we have? And even, in my own organization, making sure that people have what they need, even, mentally and emotionally during this very difficult time is a worry.
Thank you. So CUNY has a census program that our students have actively participated in. Can you talk about the role of young people in this last push to fill out the census?
Young people are key. What we have found, certainly in immigrant communities, is that young people are often the translator in their families, or one of the kind of key members of the family that helps communicate information, certainly about civic participation. So that has been huge. And I think as we see, because the census has become essentially like a social justice movement, it's about us being counted and being represented, and it's about voice, it's about power. Young people are social movement experts, as we can see with many Black Lives Matter and a lot of the activation that's going on. So them carrying the torch and carrying the charge and making sure that their families and communities and peers are educated and activated with their energy and awareness is critically important. And without student activism, without student engagement, we would not be successful. And so we certainly appreciate that as a core value, really partnering with CUNY on the census efforts.
Thank you. So we have two questions that are sort of asking the same thing. So our social work students, SWEET is the acronym, the SWEET Club, are working on registering students to vote and encouraging voting. But when it comes to the census and we want to increase the census response, we have a few folks asking if you have not received a census card or a home visit, how can people fill out the census?
Go online. This is the first time that it's digital. It is the easiest thing. Go to Census 2020 and you can actually fill it out on your computer, on your smartphone. It actually takes less than 10 minutes. So that is the easiest and quickest way. You can also call and someone will take your information over the phone. But it's really important for people to self-respond. That is the most accurate collection of data around the census. What happens when the enumerators come around and they're out in community, not as many as there have been in the past, but they're out in community, they'll knock on your door. And if you're not home, they just knock on your neighbor's door and they say, well, how many people live there? Your neighbor may or may not know, or just give a number that's often undercounted. One of the things that we found is that children under 5 are undercounted. For some reason, when people are filling out their census, they don't count the little ones. They count, that we need them to be counted as well to make sure that we have all of the resources that we need for all of our family. And so go online. It's the easiest way. It is better than engaging with an enumerator at your door because you really know all of the data and can control it. And that is what we're really encouraging people to do.
Thank you. And someone did graciously put in the chat the My 2020 Census link. So if you're looking for that link or want to share it, it's available for you. We have one question and one reminder. Dr. Jean Phelps reminds us that we need more volunteers to help increase the census count in Queens. So if anyone is interested in volunteering, she has put her email in. We want to make sure that our community is counted. You can contact her. And we also have a comment that here in Southeast Queens, we have been working tirelessly to increase our census response numbers. Even now, the organizations in the community are working every day to get the numbers up. What can we do toward getting census education and generally civics education for our young children back onto the front burner? And thanking you for your talk today.
I think that is critically important. And when we think about voter participation is just dismal. Generally, and certainly in our community in terms of the number of people that vote that are eligible to vote and census participation and just the general engagement of having your voice be heard in civic life. My family jokes with me because anytime anybody, like a pollster calls and they have like 30,000 questions, I'll sit on that phone because I say, when they say most New Yorkers, or this is what people feel, my voice has to be in there, or there's going to be a very skewed representation of who we are as a community. I'm here, I have something to say and contribute, and it's really important. But our young people are not taught just basic civics at all. I mean, I think there was a comedian that went around, the city and said, like, how many, who's our senator? How many people? And people could not answer basic questions. And civic education needs to start in elementary school. And there needs to be active learning about our society, how it works, how as every citizen has a voice and how they can be involved. One of the things that we did around the census activation is we actually funded and resourced an organization called Generation Citizen. and they are focused on promoting and strengthening civic education with young people. They developed a curriculum, over a 4-week curriculum for high school students, where they learned about the census, and there was actually action learning where they developed a campaign in their neighborhoods, in their communities, using their creativity, really empowering them to do something about it so that they can activate their communities and their families to fill out the census. So we're teaching people, you have to teach our young people, not in a static, kind of here's, boring way, here are the slides, but civic engagement is about empowerment. So the way we teach as well has to be action-based, has to be participatory, has to be empowering. And that's where you get people so much more engaged. The Children's Defense Fund years ago created freedom schools, which are really active learning about participation in equity and social justice issues. We have lots of wonderful organizations that are doing great work around civic education. We need to take those lessons, embed them into our curriculum, starting in kindergarten through high school, so that we can have a more civically engaged population, which again leads to really solving some of these problems that we have.
Thank you. So we have a question about undocumented folks, and how do we neutralize the fear of undocumented immigrants participating in the census? And what actions can we take today to make a difference in their participation?
I think that there are several things. It is illegal for the Census Bureau to share any information with any other agency. There's a lot of protections that are in place that can't be violated, or there will be consequences and repercussions. I think it is really important to know that there are a lot of organizations and institutions that are defending those practices and policies to ensure that they are not abused. It is so important for the immigrant community to stand up and be counted, and really to self-define, who they are as communities. As we're having this horrible, divisive, vicious rhetoric and definition of who our immigrant communities are. So, owning that voice and appreciating that there are organizations that will stand in the gap and ensure that their rights are being protected in the census fight is an important one. But if the immigrant community doesn't respond, in effect, that's a victory for those that want to continue to suppress and oppress that community. So one of the ways is that a lot of the organizations that are connected to immigrant communities, that are serving immigrant communities, whether they're faith-based institutions or community-based organizations, are really credible, trusted messengers. And we need them to pump up the volume and getting the word out to those communities in these last 13 days, and making it easier and accessible to fill out the census, making the digital capabilities easily accessible, tablets. We know we have challenges in some communities with Wi-Fi access, but we've got to solve for that. And we had plans to do that, and libraries were activated, but now we just got to go all out and make sure that that connection happens.
Thank you. So is there a hashtag or other social media tools for this year's census that folks can use?
There are a bunch of tools. We actually have a toolkit that I will share with you to kind of share with the group. There are tools of email messages that you can send, social media posts that you can do, little videos that you can clip. You can make your own. You can do some Facebook Live. So there's going to be a lot of activation over these next couple of weeks across the city. There's the Battle of the Boroughs, where who's going to be on top: Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, Staten Island, Manhattan. There's all these kind of incentives. So New York Census 2020 is a great place actually to go and to get access to a lot of the tools and that can be used to activate people around the census.
Thank you. A few folks have put resources in the chat and links. I don't see any other questions. You can still type in your questions. So there's a question that just came in about the number of questions on the census. I'm not sure if
There are 10 questions.
okay, yeah. So they're asking why there is such a small amount of questions on the census.
Because the census is really just basically trying to count the number of people in the United States of America, and wants to understand how many of them are in which age groups and where do people live. It's just a simple count, so that resources can be allocated. If New York State has however many millions of people, then it should get X billions of dollars, and it should have X number of congressional seats. So it really is simple, but critically important. And we know that historically we've been undercounted, and there hasn't been in previous decades as much emphasis on it. So that's why it's so important. It's so simple. It's simple data that has a huge impact on our daily lives.
Okay, anyone have any final questions for Ms. Wright? So there's a question about who the census data is shared with. So do agencies, corporations, who gets the census data?
So the census data is aggregated, and there's anybody can go online and see, we have census tracts. Our neighborhoods and communities are divided into census tracts. So you can actually click on it and see how many people live in a particular community, what their racial and ethnic composition is, how many children, people under 5, or or the different age groups. And so companies, when they're deciding, well, where are we going to put this business? We want to understand, they look at the census data. Cities, when they want to understand, where should the hospitals be placed, or where should infrastructure be placed, or where should resources for social services be placed, they look at the census tract data. Anybody can look at that data. Nonprofits use that data all the time to understand what's happening in neighborhoods and communities and how to be of service to them. And so it is widely used for every stakeholder group that you could imagine to make decisions about what to do and where to invest and how to engage. But your personal data isn't shared with any group. It's just aggregated and reflected by the census tracts, which are, like maybe about 10 or a dozen blocks, New York City blocks at a time, depending on where you live.
So we have a question. If a census taker that comes to your home is asking about people that live next door or on your block, is that information, should you be giving that information out if you know the answer? Is that a positive thing to be doing?
You should absolutely give that information out if you know the answer. And if you know the answer and you know the family, you should let them know that they should self-respond. They should just go online and fill out the form to make sure that it's completely accurate. So they will take the self-response over the enumerator's information if the self-response data is in there. But if you don't get to that person and you don't tell the enumerator, then that whole household will not be counted.
That's great information. Thank you. Any other questions? is the
Thank you, Sheena, so much for joining us. We are so grateful for this experience. I think that people got a lot out of it. I hope that people are looking at the chat and getting those resources, and that people, you know, as they say, you eat, reach one, teach one. So anything that I actually am gratified to hear about civics again. I actually took civics when I was in school, but that reminded me of the whole conversation around where people are learning certain things, around their involvement and their what we could do possibly on campus, right? Around having some workshops or conversations for our students to highlight their understanding of civic engagement. So that, thank you for that. It just reminded me of that. I actually had a book. There was a civics book. It was a course, a class I took in middle school, maybe. So I don't know how many people have that opportunity, but thank you for that. It made me remember that.
And it's
As a
a
point of engagement that we may not, yeah,
it doesn't exist
yeah,
anymore. It's
yeah.
gone away completely, and that is a real loss.
So I tell people all the time that higher education and education is the social justice dilemma of our time. But what I will say is I think it's very broad, right? So education and exposure and the that real dynamic between privilege and what goes with all the exposure you get when you have privilege, right? What you're exposed to, how you understand systems, the government, and other things. I mean, I think that people are not totally paying attention to what our young people may be missing out on because of difference in exposure, difference in curriculum, difference in things that are happening, right? And so we have to figure out how to give them those experiences and put them in those spaces so they know all of these things.
Right. And I think it's also important to appreciate that that's by design, right? I mean, structural racism has a purpose. And so ensuring that our young people don't have that exposure and don't develop those skills for engagement and empowerment is by design. And you're absolutely right in that it is our job and our role to disrupt that design and to ensure that we are empowering and educating our young people to be engaged, that it is their right, and we need them to do that. But it is, it's not by accident.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of our time, I think. I want to thank the whole community for being here. I want to remind everybody our next breakfast is on November 5th, and it will be an election debrief of sorts and other things of that sort. Right? I want to thank you, Sheena, for your prayers, because I do agree that leading is a choice and we all need to support each other. So thank you so much. And please, the goal of today was to highlight the work that Sheena's doing and others are doing. Please figure out how you can be active in this census conversation, right? Figure out what you can do in your spot. As I say, you can lead and you can do from your position no matter what. So thank you so much. Thank you, Sheena. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the York College community, to faculty, staff, students, and all of the participants. Thank you for being at our breakfast, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.